All right, good afternoon, YouTube. In today's video, we're going to be talking about sets and reps. So one thing that's really important to mention when it comes to sets and reps is that there is no such thing as a magic rep range. There's no such thing as a rep range that is going to guarantee better or worse gains depending on which one you use. The best way for you to develop both size and strength, either as independent entities or as two variables that you're trying to improve at the same time, is to use a variety of different rep ranges to manipulate your volume, your sets and reps as needed, depending on the exercises you choose, depending on where you're at in your training and what your goals are. So there's not just one clear-cut way to do things, right? That's really important to point out straight away. When it comes to the idea of a hypertrophy rep range or a strength rep range, get rid of that mentality entirely, because yes, there are more specific things you can do for your given pursuit, but that doesn't eliminate the necessity to use things that are maybe lower rep or more strength oriented, and it doesn't excuse you from needing to put in the work to do a lot of rep work as well. So you can't just do your 5s, you need to go into the 8s, the 10s, the 12s, 15s and 20s even. So you need to use all kinds of sets and reps. So before I continue going into the topic, my name is Carlsa King, standstrength.com. On this channel, we talk about size, strength, and spirit. So if that is something that interests you, if you are trying to develop yourself to be a better, bigger, stronger lifter and have a more resilient mind, then all that can all be found on this channel. So let's get into the topic of sets and reps and how you would want to program them into your program as you make it for yourself. So the one thing that I need to reiterate more than anything else is that there is no magic progression. There is no magic progression. The magic is progression. As long as you're progressing, that's what matters most. It doesn't really matter whether it's linear, whether you're using block, whether you're using concurrent, whether you're using undulating. All that really matters is that you are getting better over time. And by over time, I mean months, I mean years, I mean long term. So progression in volume and intensity week to week, and especially session to session, is not required, and it's something that's going to be unlikely to happen outside of the beginner and novice phase. So the reason why you can use something like linear periodization even when you are an intermediate and advanced lifter is because you have a light starting point and you build up volume over time, and that volume pushes your, let's say, upper limit a bit further down because you're adapting to the higher volume. So that's why when it comes to strength training and power lifters, when they train in a specific kind of way, they do these volume phases to make them more resilient for the heavier loads down the line, and because they can't just do singles all the time and expect a higher 1 rep max. So there's that, right? But then let's go on the other side of things. While I will always advocate that you try to do one more rep, or like try to hit a new rep max and everything like that, and try to progress in intensity dependent on volume, meaning like once you hit a certain amount of sets and reps, then yeah, that gives you reason to believe that, okay, it's time to up in the weight. That's not always going to happen. And the thing is, the main ways of progressive overload that anyone is kind of like going to be aware of is increases in weight, and this is mandatory, you can't get around this. And there's increases in sets and reps. Other variables are also going to be utilized, but like frequency and everything like that, but we're not going to be talking about them in this video. But the one key thing I want to reiterate when it comes to this topic is that there are also other ways to make progression that isn't dependent on adding more weight and doing more reps. If your rep quality gets better from last session, then that is important to note. Let's say even if you can't lift more weight in the next session, maybe you're lifting the same weight with a lower RPE or a little bit further from failure. Or I know that doesn't really make sense, but if you have trained, you know, sometimes this happens where, at least it's happened to me, like when I was trying to get above 275, there would be times when I'm doing my rep work, it feels a lot easier than last week. I think that gives me a good reason to believe that I can hit a new number of reps with a higher weight or just a higher weight in general, and it doesn't work out that way. So that is something that I personally ran into. Let me know in the comments below if that's something you yourself have ran into also. But that's something I want to point out. There are other ways for you to actually make progress that you're not noticing. And those small ways that you're making progress that you aren't really noticing and tracking, those are the things that actually make you keep going forward in the long run. Those small little victories that we're not really taking into consideration, those are the things that new PRs are built off of. If you can't stay consistent with your plan, if you can't stick to the plan and keep your nose to the grindstone and keep working when you're not increasing in reps, sets, and weight, but you and yeah, like if you can't keep that consistency with those things, even when those aren't going up, that is why you're not getting any stronger. That's why you're not getting any bigger. You need to be able to just stay focused and stay on the path. Now, the next thing I want to kind of go over is that powerlifting or strength training and bodybuilding. So I personally think that powerlifting and bodybuilding, because when I'm looking at this, I wrote this or typed this out a couple days ago. So powerlifting and bodybuilding, I consider them both to be strength training because you can't eliminate strength from the equation. You really can't. You can't separate size and strength. Powerlifting is your 1 rep max in 3 lifts, the squat, bench, and deadlift. Bodybuilding is building your body. It is trying to maximize muscle growth, and strength will go into both of them no matter what. The goals might be different, but the components are the same. So the analogy that I've kind of come up with to kind of talk about this idea is if you give two carpenters, two woodworkers, the same exact pieces of equipment or the same exact resources, tools, and everything, right? One might be able to build a boat and one might be able to build a house. Now, I'm not a carpenter, so like call me out on the logistics, but what I'm trying to say is you can give someone the same exact tools, you can give someone the same exact pieces of equipment, and they can build two different things. I mean, give a set of Legos to two different kids. One is going to build something completely different than the other, even though they're made of the same parts. I kind of think of size and strength in that way rather than thinking that they are completely different, they have nothing to do with each other. No, they are two different goals built with the same blocks. But here's the thing. The goal cannot be the method. Doing a 1 rep max will not build up a new 1 rep max. Even when you look at something like the max effort method, even though you're doing heavy singles, you're doing heavy singles in mechanically disadvantageous variations or other variations that in theory build up a new 1 rep max, but you're also doing a lot of bodybuilding work in conjunction with that. And then the other thing that we need to talk about is that progressive overload from a hypertrophy perspective is proof that you are getting bigger. If you build up your chest and you add muscle to your chest, eventually the amount of weight that you're lifting will become insufficient in giving you a hypertrophy stimulus, so you need to up the weight. So that's why progressive overload occurs in bodybuilding. Whereas for powerlifting, you're trying to almost force it. But the thing is, there are ways that you can manipulate that. So if you look at a strength channel and you go watch a video like the top 5 ways to blow up your bench, the top 10 ways to blow up your squat, some of those tips are going to be from form manipulation. It's going to be, are you squeezing your scapula as tight as you possibly can, getting them to be as tight as you possibly can, getting your elbows to be tucked in a very specific kind of way. These are all things that, yes, will add pounds to the bench, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's adding tissue to the muscle you're trying to build. So that's one thing that needs to be kind of brought up. But regardless, whether you are training for powerlifting, whether you're training for bodybuilding, whether you're trying to get stronger on certain lifts, you will need to have ways in which you can try to add load over time. You cannot separate size and strength. Performance and physique go hand in hand, and how you train and how you program will change depending on your own intentions and your own goals. So some muscles you just don't want to train, that's cool. Some lifts you just don't want to get stronger, that's cool. Include them in the program, but you don't need to like go balls to the walls on everything at any given time. The next thing so now we're going to talk about like progression, right? When it comes to strength training, there's really only one kind of periodization. There's only really one kind of progression, and that is some amount of everything. No matter whether you do block, undulating, concurrent, conjugate, whatever, linear is always going to be there. It's just how it kind of reveals itself and how it kind of shows over time is going to be different, right? But then when you have things like concurrent and conjugation and stuff of that nature, every single good training program for strength is going to include some amount of linearity, some amount of conjugation, meaning exercise rotation, exercise variation, some amount of concurrent training or undulating nonlinear training, because I kind of feel like they're just more similar, they are different, and we just have too many words to describe the same thing. But all good strength training programs will have some amount of all of them. Now, here's the thing. The one thing that does need to just completely die out is linear progression. Linear progression is when you keep sets and reps the exact same and you just add 5 pounds each week. I think that is horrible. Linear periodization, it still has a similar taste and tone to it, but it's not exactly the same. So with linear periodization, you can do something kind of like Faz Lift's 853 method, and that is a linear periodization. You have a eights block where you're doing 3 sets of 8. You have a fives block where you're doing fives and then like then threes, right? And you can even expand that and maybe add another block where you start out with 12s or 10s, something of that nature, right? So that's one way of going about it. Even if you do something kind of like 531 where you're doing a wave, there's still linearity to that. There's always going to be linearity when it comes to a strength program. But if you really want to get big and you really want to get strong, you can't just force yourself to add 5 pounds every single week. That's one thing I need to talk about and make sure gets hammered home. And the next thing I want to kind of bring up is block periodization. When it comes to block periodization, really block periodization is just linear periodization, but with these segmented points in time, and you give each couple weeks a different name to your training for the most part. I personally think that block periodization is actually kind of useless for people who will care about size and or strength. Now, when it comes to like skill-based, well, I mean, powerlifting is skill-based, but you know, like track and field athletes, competitive athletes, like whether it's boxing, MMA, soccer, track and field, football, things of that nature, right? Block periodization works really well because the specificity of their sport happens outside of the weight room. But when it comes to us, people who just care about looking good or being strong, it's just in the gym. We don't need to do blocks. Like maybe a powerlifter can for benefit from a hypertrophy block and a strength block. There's that, but at the same time, it's just kind of like over time their training just becomes more and more specific, and I think it just still falls into that linear periodization, that 8s 5s 3, that different phases of different rep thresholds and rep sets and rep ranges that just cater to a specific goal. When it comes to strength training, you build up, you peak, you deload, and repeat. As you get stronger, linear needs to be combined with other methods as you get advanced. And I would even argue this implementing bits and pieces of them if you are a beginner. You don't need to commit to the whole thing, but you should have to keep it in there. Now, that's for strength. The need to deload, I feel more recently, good arguments have been presented in contrary of the need to deload for hypertrophy. I think that they are useful. I think that for hypertrophy, they can work. And I think for hypertrophy, there are definitely applications that allow it in the same way that there are applications that, you don't need to do it all the time, or you don't need to plan it in, or things of that nature, that there are variables you can manipulate to limit the necessity of a deload. But with that being said, I'm not going to say, like, as a blanket statement, they're useless for hypertrophy. I think they can work, and they also, but they're not a necessity, I would say. And then when it comes to nonlinear concurrent undulating periodizations and progressions, volume and intensity is being fluctuated, but you're always keeping in touch with each of them, because if you do like a purely linear progression, which I don't really recommend, like you're gonna go to a point where like your volume is so low, but your intensity is so high, and then you have this point in time where you're just doing only volume work. I prefer training in a way where there's volume and there's intensity, and they are present in the program at any given time. So linearity, like I said, will always be a feature. The progression will always be the same. The numbers of variables have just changed, and the timeline has changed. So that's one thing that I feel like needs to be brought up when it comes to nonlinear, concurrent, or undulating periodization. So now coming down to choosing your sets and reps. Sets and reps depend on the movement and the progression you will apply to it. So I don't think bodybuilders should use linear, meaning I don't think bodybuilders should just try to add 5 pounds each week. I don't even think strength athletes should try to do that unless there's other things in the program that are involved, such as AMRAP sets, maybe um, like rep goals or things of that nature, even. But generally speaking, well, rep goals I think are more applicable for hypertrophy. But for strength training, I think just blindly adding 5 pounds is not the way to go, unless you have a very specific kind of program tailored to do that. Like the one that comes to mind and the one I think most people can benefit from is fast lifts, 8 5s and 3s. I think that's a great strength training protocol. I think that's a great example of what linear should be. So there's that. So bodybuilders should not use linear, meaning they shouldn't just blindly add 5 pounds. Your progression, if you are a bodybuilder, and the manipulation of intensity should be dependent on volume. So I think that if you hit, like, so that's why I mentioned the rep goal system. If you can hit 25 or 30 reps or whatever rep goal you assign to a 3 set limit, and you hit that or go beyond that, then that's good. That lets you know, that's the indication, like, okay, it's time to add weight. Same thing with something like the evolving rep ranges, a la NH. So like if you do the rep goal system or whether you do evolving rep ranges, both of those are dependent on volume. You add weight if you hit a certain volume threshold. So it's a basic double progression. Power lifters should always have the intention of lifting heavier and heavier over time. And I do think that there is something to be said that powerlifters need to make sure that each week something does go up. So this is not sustainable, and which is why you always have to start light, build up, hit a peak, regress, and then repeat. That's the powerlifter way of training. Like there's no getting around that. The main thing that will be a commonality across training, whether you are a bodybuilder or a powerlifter, is that you need to pick a starting point, have a method of progression, and commit. A couple points I want to make is that pre-selected weights and pre-selected weight jumps are kind of stupid. Like with the exception of the starting point, that's like a lot of my own programs, right? I I write down a starting point and then I provide you the method of progression and then I expect you to commit. If that is it. I don't really like programs that say in 12 weeks you're going to have a new PR. In 4 weeks you're going to hit a peak. In this that, like these really weird, these arbitrary time crunches. No, you need to have a method of progression and then you need to commit to it. You can't just say to yourself, in week 1 I'm going to hit 70% at RPE 7 and then 80% at RPE 7.5. Like what if you go to your 80% and then, because percentages affect different people differently. Like for some people 80% is a 6 to 10 rep max. For other people 80% is a 3 or 5 rep max, like just depending on your muscle fiber type distribution. So to kind of follow these blind programs, and especially when I see programs that say like percentages and RPEs at the same time, I just think they're so shit. So don't use those programs if you see them. Because one big issue is that a panicked lifter, someone who is so finicky, someone who's prone to paralysis by analysis, someone who is prone to catastrophize and everything of that nature, the moment they experience an RPE they are not prepared for, they want to throw out their program. They want to go to the start of the program again. They want to, this, that, and the other, change everything up, and then they don't commit to their program. They don't commit to their plan. If you need to try a week again or do another or do workout again, like repeat a workout, that's much better than just thinking to yourself, I'm going to throw out this whole thing. So let's talk about progressions for bodybuilding. So I did mention that bodybuilders should not use linear progression, and quite honestly, no one should, not even novices. They can, but should they? I don't think so. So as I mentioned, the rep goal system by Steve Shaw, Massive Iron, great. I think that is one of the best ways to train for hypertrophy because you're always pushing that envelope close to failure. You're always going to be within that 1 to 3 reps away from failure. And with the rep goal system, you just need to make sure that your form is good, that you're training intelligently, that you are taking care of your sleep and your diet, and these are things that you should be taking care of whether you are a powerlifter or a bodybuilder. And then of course there is the evolving rep range kind of way of going about things. So if you have a rep goal, so what you're going to say is like, okay, once I hit 25 total reps and I do that in 3 sets, or if then that's when you add weight. If you have something like the evolving rep range, then let's say you're doing something for 3 sets of 4 to 6 reps. Week 1, you can do 3 sets of 4. And then on week 2, you do 5, 4, 4. Week 3, you do 6, 5, 4. So that's one way of going about it. Maybe you would do that with something a bit heavier, like a deadlift. That's what you can do. These are ways for you to stick with the same weight for a little bit more time, to really adapt yourself to the weight, adapt your body to the weight before you add more load. Because you can force progressive overload if you just, go week to week to week to week. But the thing is, you're going to run into a wall. All you're going to be doing is peaking whatever strength is already available to you, not building any additional strength and not building additional muscle. Then there's also step loading. So when it comes to step loading and wave loading, I would used to call this right here, like step loading method number 1, a volume wave. But I think it's just more appropriate to call it a like another form of step loading, like, at least in my mind. Correct me if I'm wrong. So if you're watching this late in the video, correct me if I'm wrong. And step loading in my mind is when intensity is the same but volume is being manipulated, and wave loading is when intensity is being manipulated but volume is around the same. At least that's how I've conceptualized it more recently. So step loading method number 1, you are changing sets. So week 1, you do 135 for 3 sets of 10. Week 2, 135 for 4 sets of 10. And then week 3, 135 for 5 sets of 10. You add weight and you're back at 3 sets of 10. I would do this with something maybe like a machine press, a dumbbell bench press, a machine row. That's just me. Maybe leg press. I wouldn't really do this with like your free weight compound barbell exercises, quite honestly. I think for those ones, it's just better to stick to 3 to 5 sets max, but kind of choose between both. And if you do 5 sets, you typically have to be in the lower rep ranges, like 4 to 8 being the most I'm comfortable recommending. That's just me. And then, of course, the step loading method number 2, which is basically an evolving rep range, but you're keeping sets static across all 3 sets. So week 1, 3 sets of 5. Week 2, 3 sets of 6. Week 3, 3 sets of 7. At any point, if you miss a set, just repeat that week. It doesn't mean that the program is shit. It doesn't mean that you are inferior. It doesn't mean that you are failing. It doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It just means, all right, try it again next week. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no such thing as a zero-sum gain from going to the gym, lifting weights, training hard. Even if you use the same weight on a specific exercise for 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 8 weeks, it's not like it's doing nothing. Maybe it's not doing the most it could, but it's not like it's doing absolutely nothing, so long as it's like heavy enough, So there's that. So the next thing, there are so many ways to do things, but generally speaking, I just want you to follow these recommendations. 1, start light and build up. If you are a bodybuilder, you will benefit from this because, like, in my opinion, because oftentimes what ends up happening is that you run into the wall so fast that you then will deprive yourself of good hard training by then going to the opposite extreme and starting too light. Start light once, manage your progression, manage your expectations, be patient, be disciplined, and slowly build up. Because if you slowly build up, your peak actually gets further and further away from you, and as you move toward it, it actually moves further and further away also. That's kind of the goal as far as like the bodybuilder progression, in my opinion. When it comes to strength training, you want to intelligently hit your peak, like then drop down, and then like build up that process again to hit a higher peak, higher than the one you hit previously. So you're kind of like jumping between mountains, That's what I would say is kind of like the more powerlifting style thing. Give me your thoughts in the comments below. The next thing is do not, I swear to God, do not use the same sets and reps for every exercise. If you look at a program and everything is a 5x5, or even, this is like the biggest cop out. If everything is a 5x5 and then the accessories are a 3x5, don't run that program. It's horrible. Don't use the same progression on every exercise. If That's another big one as well. When it comes to how I like to program and how I like to recommend things, not everything is going to progress in the same rate, because everything is going to be affected by the other thing, and that's just kind of the name of the game when you are pursuing size and strength concurrently. And then here's the big part. If things don't go to plan, don't throw out the whole plan. Just because a football team loses one game, they don't just completely get rid of everyone involved. They don't just get rid of all their players, they don't get rid of all their coaches. Just because your opponent scores a 3-point shot on you in basketball, it doesn't mean that you just give up and wail your arms around, you know? It's a very childish way of doing things. Just because you get punched in the face one time, it doesn't mean you lost the entire match. So if things don't go to plan, don't throw out the whole plan. Just do the plan better. Do the plan again. Reevaluate, assess, try again. Don't get defeated. Make small changes over time as needed. But I promise you, the necessity to make a change doesn't just happen the moment something doesn't go exactly to plan. And then number 6, blank. All right, so now let's talk about the main movement. So this is going to be the first movement of the day. This is going to be the heaviest compound of the day. So I made sure to not say that this is going to be the first movement of the day. I think I actually just said it though. So this is going to be the first compound heavy movement of the day. So it's going to be the movement that is the most fatiguing, the most stimulating. You can do something like rows before your barbell bench. You can do something like pull-ups before your overhead press. You can do something like that. But it's typically going to be something that you do almost in a way to either do some prehab, get a little bit of blood flowing into the antagonistic muscle to help out with the next movement, and it's going to be for like a bit more of a bodybuilder style thing, so it's going to be more like a supplementary movement. But the heaviest movement of the day, and it's probably going to be your barbell squat, bench, deadlift, your row, your overhead press, or their close variations, so close grip, high bar, like Romanian deadlift, stiff leg deadlift. This is just going to be the most stimulating and most fatiguing movement of the day. The recommendations are going to be based off of things that are more relevant for strength and things that are more relevant for size. So first is 1 to 5 rep max. There's one thing that I'm missing here, and that is you should be doing back off sets. So you're going to do a 1 to 5 rep max, and then you're going to do 2 to 3 back off sets, maybe even 4 depending on the lift, but 2 to 3 is a more comfortable recommendation I'm going to recommend. This is something that I've been doing for years, and this is something I got from Alex from Alpha Destiny. I highly recommend that you get his book, Naturally Enhanced. The 2 books, if I had to say, about good training practices and programming, the 2 that helped me the most were Naturally Enhanced and Massive Iron by Steve Shaw. What's interesting about the Massive Iron one is that and this is something like a testament to the quality of Steve's content and his channel, and that is everything you learn from his book is available for free already on his channel. Same thing with Alex from Alpha Destiny, but both of them have made great books to help you with your programming, and I think those are really good ones. So you're going to do 1 to 5 rep max, followed by 2 to 3 back off sets. That's one way for you to kind of program things. So maybe you can start out with doing like a 5-3-1 kind of thing where you do a 5 rep max, then a 3 rep max, then a 1 rep max, but you're always doing back off sets, and you go from there. That's 5-3-1 in a nutshell. Another way to do it is like, let's say you hit the same, like you hit 90% for 1, but then your back off sets is where you actually make progression. That's another way of going about things. Another rep range and set and rep range, so is the 2 to 4. So 2 to 4 reps, I think, can work on deadlift if you are the kind of person who struggles with doing rep work on deadlift. In this case, I would recommend doing like 3 to 5 sets, so that way you're getting anywhere between 10 to 20 or 6 to 20 good reps. I would try to be within that 10 to 20 range though, as far as like your overall total. So yeah, like 2 to 4 reps, that's specifically for deadlift. I wouldn't recommend that on any other lift. If you were doing the 2 to 4, then you're probably going to use sets to compensate and get into a couple more reps to actually make sure you're getting enough volume in. Then if you are a bodybuilder and you are trying to figure out, well, what is the lowest I should go? I think the absolute lowest is 4 reps. With the exception of the deadlift, I think the absolute lowest is 4 reps. There's no reason to go much lower than that. You could make an argument for 3, but I think that 4, maybe even 5 is the absolute lowest you should go as far as like the lower rep range for your building process of things. Like, I don't think that it's going to be the best use of your time if you're only doing threes, if you're staying in fives the entire time. But there are points in time where threes and fives are going to be very useful, but they shouldn't make up the bulk of your strength training. I think that the 4 to 6 or 4 to 8 rep range is going to be great, and even better is the 6 to 10 if you are bodybuilding. With this, you always want to make sure that on your main movement, your main strength progression movement, that you are keeping 1 to 3 reps away from failure. You want to stop right before failure. You don't want to actually hit failure. You just want to be 1 rep shy. You need to kind of become disciplined and be familiar with your own body and your own training to kind of know where that point is and, give that a shot. But generally speaking, you want to be that 1 rep shy no matter what. Like, at minimum or at most, like, you don't want to go beyond that. You don't actually want to hit failure on these movements just because it can fuck up too much of the rest of the program. All right, so next is going to be the supplementary movement. So a lot of my vocabulary comes from more of a conjugate-esque powerlifting style kind of training. So this movement is going to be the second heaviest lift of the day. It either complements the main movement, so something like a deadlift and a barbell row, or a deadlift and a Romanian deadlift for rep work, or it's going to be antagonistic. So let's say it's your deadlift day and then you do some type of squat variation, a front squat, a high bar squat, a leg press. So it's going to be that second heaviest movement of the day. It can be done immediately after the first movement, or it can have an accessory in between to give some recovery to the area. That's a possibility. There's nothing wrong with that. When it comes to recommendations, these ones are also going to be from more relevant to strength to more relevant for size. For this movement, if you're strength training, if you are bodybuilding, I don't really care. It should be in a different rep threshold than your first movement. So let's say you do the 1 to 5 rep max plus your 2 to 3 sets of back offs, right? Your next movement should be 3 to 5 sets of 4 to 6 or 4 to 8 reps. That should be the second movement, the second heaviest movement of the day. You can have that accessory in between, but you don't want to just do the same thing for both. You don't want to do 1 to 5 rep max with 2 to 3 back off sets on a deadlift and then do 1 to 5 rep max on a squat and then do back off sets. It's not going to be a good time for you. So that's why I don't recommend it on this second movement. If you want to make the second movement the most important movement of the day, then switch them around, but don't treat them like they're going to be the same thing. That's horrible advice. Also, the 6 to 10 rep range and the 8 to 12 are also going to be very good here. So if you do something kind of like right here, like the 4 to 6 and 4 to 8 or 6 to 10 on the first movement, then on the second one, you're going to kind of bump down into the next rep threshold and the next rep range and go from there. Here is where I would say that you want to push closer to failure, so 1 to 2 reps away from failure. And the reason why I say that this is where stimulus to fatigue ratio becomes important is because this is where exercise selection really matters. I think, and this might just be my power lifter DNA or powerlifting bias, that if you're doing heavy deadlifts, what's going to benefit you more as far as back development might not be barbell rows. Now, I personally program barbell rows after my heavy deadlifts because I like barbell rows. I think they're useful to me and I can recover from them. But if you don't meet those criteria, if it's something that you don't feel like you need to do, and if you feel like there are too many other limiting factors, like my low back is not a limiting factor, my posterior chain is not much of a limiting factor, I feel like I can give my best effort to my barbell rows. But if you feel like you can't do that, then a machine row is going to be more beneficial to you, because I can get to that 1 to 2 reps away from failure with the barbell row in these rep ranges. But if you feel like you can't, then it becomes beneficial to do something like a seated cable row, a chest supported row, or something like that. So that's why I mean, like, stimulus to fatigue ratio becomes important and exercise selection becomes important. So let's say you do your bench press, and then on this movement, rather than doing like close grip bench or something like that, maybe you can do something like dips or dumbbell bench. Who knows? It just kind of depends, but generally speaking, you just want to make sure you're choosing something where you can still hit 1 to 2 reps away from failure in these ranges. And then finally, we have accessory or bodybuilding work. And I recently had a discussion with Landon from Basement Bodybuilding, and he has a goal. He has a dream to eliminate the word accessory. And I totally understand why. Because accessory makes sense from a hypertrophy or from a powerlifting perspective, because it means that it serves another lift. It is subservient. It is inferior to another lift. It is only relevant because its relation to another lift. So I can understand why accessory from a hypertrophy or from a hypertrophy standpoint is like totally useless as an idea. Instead, it's kind of like bodybuilding work, which is just as important as the main work. And I think that any serious powerlifter will kind of agree with that. A lot of people hear the word accessory, it carries that connotation of, oh, it's not as important, it is inferior. But any high quality strength athlete will treat their accessories just as important as they do their main work. But that's something needs to be said, right? So you can, whether you call this accessories or you call this bodybuilding work, that's totally up to you. But it needs to be treated just as important as the main work. There still needs to be a method of progression. You need to have a way to get stronger on these movements as well. So these recommendations are going to be, again, more relevant from strength at first, and then it becomes more relevant to size moving downwards. I think that the 5 to 8 rep range is great on things like bicep curls. Like I really do. I think even like if you do something like weighted dips, overhead presses, close grip bench, other more heavier isolation movements that you can do, I think 5 to 8 works really well. Then of course we have the standard 6 to 10, 8 to 12, and 8 to 15. Almost everything can kind of go in there. The reason why I would recommend these on, like, let's say arm work and things of that nature is because you have to remember something. Yes, if you can do heavier weight, you can stimulate muscle fibers faster and everything like that and hit failure faster and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is this: you're not just working your muscles, you're also working your joints. You have to take your joints, tendons, and connective tissues into consideration with your exercises. So the reason why I really, really like cable, hammer, curls is because they stimulate the muscle and they don't have that big of an impact on my joints. But for that to be true, I also train it in the 8 to 12 or 8 to 15 rep range, because I hit failure in those higher rep ranges because I can hit failure on the muscle without damaging the connective tissues. So that's something that you want to keep in mind when it comes to these exercises. And then finally, 10 to 15 and 12 to 20. So 8 to 15 is actually something I kind of recommend on something like lateral raises. Like I'm kind of hesitant to say 8 because I mean these are strict too. So 8 to 15 because with something like lateral raises, for one, no one's really going to get insanely strong with lateral raises. No one is going to linear progress their way up to a 50-pound lateral raise. It's just not going to happen. So 8 to 15 is good when it comes to like adding weight though. So let's say you're like, you're a small new lifter to the gym, and I know you exist. I see you every day. You should not be touching the 30s and trying to swing them up. Go down to the 5s and then progress. Like do 3 sets of 8 to 15. When you can do 3 sets of 15, put down the 5s, pick up the 10s, repeat that process. Like it's not that bad. You don't need to, you're not there to impress anyone. You're there to improve yourself. So, and on these lifts, you want to be going to failure and going beyond failure. So things like myo reps, myo sets, drop sets. I think these things work really well on the accessories or the bodybuilding work. I don't really think that it's something that I would comfortably recommend on other things outside of the occasional, let's do this for fun. But as far as like programming them in and being a feature of the program, I don't think it's entirely necessary. So that is it for sets and reps. A couple things I want to talk about. I am going to be making these videos in the coming days, and they are going to be available first on my Patreon. So if you want to support the channel, if you want to support me, then I would highly recommend that you go onto Patreon. It would keep me able to make more videos, and I do eventually want to make like I want to have just, I don't need to be rich, right? I don't need to be rich when it comes to like making videos or anything like that, but I just want it to be something a bit more sustainable so that way I can make more videos. I can like, take that money, invest it in the channel, invest it into the business, eventually build, open up a gym here in Vegas, or, well, I'll share my future plans in another video, but yeah, be able to open up a gym and everything of that nature, but also provide you all with the highest information that I possibly can offer. So when it comes to these videos, they will be available first on Patreon, but they will find their way to the channel and they will be available for free. Nothing that will be available on my Patreon will be locked there forever. They will eventually find their way to YouTube. That I can guarantee you, but it's just a matter of like if you choose to support the channel and if you just want to see those things first, then they will be available first on Patreon. So first topic is I'm going to be talking about heavy light splits versus a volume and intensity split. I'm also going to be talking about the heavy light medium split and applications of the heavy light medium that I really like. I'm also going to be posting a full guide to upper, lower, and full body training. These are the main splits that I've been running for the past couple of years, and then my opinion on how to progress on accessory and bodybuilding exercises. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Carlos the King, stanstrength.com. Please go into the link in the description below for coaching, and if you do want to support the channel, Patreon and merch. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much. Have a good day.